"I did something unforgivable," she once said, "but I don't believe I deserve to die for it." Those words came years after a Tennessee courtroom fell silent as a judge delivered a sentence rarely heard: death. Christa Gail Pike, just 18 years old at the time of her crime, would become the youngest woman sentenced to death in modern American history. Decades later, after countless appeals, her execution has been scheduled for 2026, reopening one of the most disturbing murder cases Tennessee has ever seen. The ruling was blunt and final. Christa Pike was ordered to be put to death by electrocution, a punishment rarely used even then. As the sentence was read aloud, witnesses described inappropriate laughter and strange reactions that only deepened public horror. Pike would later claim she didn't fully process what was happening, not until it was too late. To understand how an 18-year-old ended up on death row, you have to go back to the beginning. Christa Gail Pike was born on March 10, 1976, in Beckley, West Virginia. Her childhood was marked by instability, neglect, and abuse. Her mother struggled with severe drug addiction and alcoholism, often prioritizing parties and relationships over parenting. Christa was frequently left to fend for herself, bouncing between relatives with little consistency or supervision. From an alarmingly young age, Christa was exposed to substances. By 9 years old, she was already using marijuana. By 12, alcohol was a regular part of her life. Abuse, emotional and physical, was also a constant presence, shaping her worldview and emotional development. For a brief time, she lived with her father, but that arrangement didn't last. Her drug use and failing school performance led him to remove her from the home entirely. With nowhere else to go, Christa was placed in a juvenile educational facility. Even there, she struggled. She eventually dropped out in 9th grade, effectively ending her traditional education. While at the juvenile center, Christa learned about Job Corps, a federal residential program designed to help at-risk youth gain job skills and escape harmful environments. For the first time, she saw a possible way out. She applied, was accepted, and in 1995 moved to Job Corps Center in Knoxville, Tennessee to study computer programming. The program required students to live on campus, providing structure and supervision around the clock. For Christa, it was a dramatic change from the chaos she'd known. But the emotional damage from her past didn't disappear, it followed her. At first, she struggled socially. Quiet, withdrawn, and suspicious, she kept to herself. That changed when she met a 17-year-old fellow student named Tadaryl Ship. He was the first to speak to her in class, and the connection was immediate. What started as friendship quickly escalated into an intense romantic relationship. Together, they bonded over feelings of alienation, anger, and eventually a shared fascination with the occult. They wore pentagram necklaces and spoke openly about dark beliefs. For Christa, Tadaryl became more than a boyfriend. She later described him as her protector, the first person who made her feel valued rather than discarded. But that fragile sense of security wouldn't last. Another student, Colleen Slemmer, had enrolled in the same computer programming course just months earlier. Friendly and well-liked, Colleen had become close friends with Tadaryl. To Christa, that friendship felt like a threat, one she would soon become dangerously obsessed with.
Colleen Slemmer arrived at Job Corps hoping for a fresh start. Originally from Florida, she had dropped out of high school, and her mother believed the program could help her rebuild her future. By most accounts, Colleen was friendly, optimistic, and focused on moving forward. But in Christa Pike's eyes, Colleen represented something else entirely. Whenever Christa saw Colleen talking to Tadaryl Ship, jealousy consumed her. Despite repeated assurances from friends that Colleen and Tadaryl were just classmates, Christa became convinced that Colleen was trying to steal her boyfriend. The tension between the two women steadily escalated. By early January 1995, Christa's jealousy had turned into fixation. On January 5th, she confided in another student, Shadolla Peterson, that she wanted Colleen dead. Peterson, who also shared an interest in occult beliefs, initially dismissed the statement as anger or exaggeration. But Christa was serious. She soon approached Tadaryl Ship with a disturbing proposal. According to later testimony, Christa claimed that their beliefs required escalation, that a human sacrifice was necessary. Colleen, she insisted, was the chosen victim. At first, both Tadaryl and Peterson hesitated, but over time, Christa's influence and persistence wore them down. The plan slowly took shape. On the night of January 12, 1995, Christa put everything into motion. She borrowed a small box cutter from the Job Corps Center and carried an additional utility knife. The group planned to lure Colleen away under the guise of reconciliation. As a supposed peace offering, they would bring marijuana, a tactic designed to lower her guard. Around 8 p.m., Christa, Tadaryl, and Peterson approached Colleen at her dormitory. Smiling and friendly, they suggested talking things out. Believing the conflict was finally ending, Colleen agreed to go with them. The four left the Job Corps campus and walked toward a secluded area near the University of Tennessee's agricultural facilities. The location, an abandoned steam plant, was isolated, dark, and far from public view. Only 3 of them would return. Once they arrived, Christa attacked without warning. She struck Colleen violently, slamming her head into her knee. When Colleen tried to escape, Tadaryl chased her down, dragged her back, and restrained her. What followed was not quick. For more than half an hour, Colleen was brutally assaulted. She was slashed repeatedly with a box cutter, suffering deep wounds to her throat, back, and body. Evidence later showed extensive defensive injuries, proof that she fought desperately to survive. At some point, a pentagram was carved into her chest. Throughout the attack, Colleen begged for her life. Her pleas were ignored. Finally, Christa lifted a large chunk of asphalt from the ground and smashed it onto Colleen's head with devastating force. The blow was fatal. According to the medical examiner, Colleen died from blunt force trauma. The crime was over, but Christa wasn't finished. After the murder, Christa Pike committed an act that would haunt investigators and shock the public. She removed a fragment of Colleen Slemmer's skull and kept it as a souvenir. When she returned to the Job Corps Center around 10:15 p.m., Christa went straight to another student's room. Calm, smiling, and disturbingly animated, she announced that she had just killed Colleen. She pulled the skull fragment from her jacket pocket and described the attack in vivid detail, dancing, laughing, and singing as she spoke. The next morning, January 13, 1995, university grounds workers discovered Colleen's body near the campus greenhouses. Law enforcement was immediately called in, and the scene quickly revealed signs of extreme violence. Forensic evidence told a clear story. Blood found on Tadaryl Ship's clothing matched Colleen's DNA. Witness statements began piling up. The case unraveled rapidly. Christa was the first to be arrested. During questioning, she waived her Miranda rights and provided a detailed 46-page confession to investigator Randy York. In it, she admitted her involvement, but attempted to minimize her role, claiming the plan was only meant to scare Colleen and that things spiraled out of control. That claim directly contradicted her earlier behavior and statements. She also told investigators that she heard voices and experienced blackouts during the crime, assertions that would later be scrutinized heavily in court. On January 14th, just 2 days after the murder, all 3 participants were formally charged. Christa's trial began in March 1996 in Knox County. The prosecution painted a picture of premeditation, manipulation, and cruelty. The defense argued mental instability and shared responsibility. The jury wasn't convinced. On March 22, 1996, Christa Pike was found guilty of first-degree premeditated murder and conspiracy to commit murder. 8 days later, she was sentenced to death. She collapsed in the courtroom when the sentence was read.
Tadaryl Ship, who was only 17 at the time of the crime, was tried separately. Because of his age, he was not eligible for the death penalty and received a life sentence with the possibility of parole. Shadolla Peterson pled guilty as an accessory and received probation. For Christa Pike, death row awaited.
Life on death row did not bring calm or reflection for Christa Pike. Instead, prison records and court documents show a continued pattern of violence, instability, and disciplinary problems that followed her into incarceration. After being sentenced to death in 1996, Pike was transferred to Tennessee's Women's Death Row, where she would spend decades awaiting execution. Over the years, she filed numerous appeals, challenging both her conviction and sentence. Her defense attorneys argued that her abusive childhood, mental health issues, and young age at the time of the crime should exempt her from execution. However, courts consistently ruled that the brutality and premeditated nature of the murder outweighed mitigating factors. While her legal battle continued, Pike's behavior behind bars became part of the official record. On August 24, 2001, Pike was involved in a violent assault inside the prison. According to correctional reports, she attacked fellow inmate Patricia Jones, wrapping a shoelace around Jones's neck and attempting to strangle her. The victim nearly lost consciousness before guards intervened. The incident resulted in additional charges in disciplinary sanctions against Pike. In later interviews and filings, Pike claimed the attack was an act of self-defense. She alleged that Jones had verbally harassed her for years, mocking her death sentence and making racially charged comments about her execution. Pike stated that she only intervened when Jones attacked another inmate. Despite these claims, prison officials concluded that Pike had used excessive and potentially lethal force. This incident became a key point cited by prosecutors and state officials when opposing later appeals for clemency, reinforcing the argument that Pike continued to pose a danger even while incarcerated. Meanwhile, the cases of her co-defendants moved on very different paths. Tadaryl Ship, who was 17 years old at the time of the murder, received a life sentence with the possibility of parole. His age legally shielded him from the death penalty under Tennessee law. In October 2025, Ship appeared before the parole board. After reviewing the graphic details of the crime and his role in the prolonged torture and killing of Colleen Slemmer, the board denied parole. His next review is scheduled for 2031. Shadolla Peterson, who served as a lookout during the murder, pleaded guilty as an accessory after the fact. She received 6 years of probation and avoided prison entirely, a disparity in sentencing that has been heavily criticized and frequently raised in public debates surrounding Pike's execution. Over the years, Pike's public statements have been inconsistent. At times, she expressed remorse, acknowledging the pain she caused Colleen's family and admitting responsibility for her actions. At other moments, she minimized her role, arguing that she was being punished more severely than her co-defendants for the same crime. "I deserve to be in prison for the rest of my life," Pike said in one interview, "but I don't deserve to die for something that involved 3 people." In September 2025, after nearly 3 decades of appeals, the Tennessee Supreme Court issued a final execution order. Pike's execution was scheduled for September 30, 2026. If carried out, she will become the first woman executed in Tennessee since 1817, more than 200 years ago. She will also be the only person in the modern history of the state executed for a crime committed at the age of 18. The execution is set to take place at Riverbend Maximum Security Institution in Nashville, home to Tennessee's execution chamber. Under state law, Pike has the right to choose her method of execution. Lethal injection is the default, but because her crime occurred before January 1, 1999, she also has the option of electricity, the same method originally ordered by the court in 1996. As the execution date approaches, the case has once again drawn national attention. Advocacy groups argue that executing someone who committed a crime as a teenager violates evolving standards of justice.
Supporters of the sentence argue that the extraordinary cruelty of the murder demands the ultimate punishment. For Colleen Slemmer's family, the focus remains unchanged. Their daughter never came home, and for them, this case has never been about debate, only about accountability.